The Tuesday the war began started like any other, with a perfect cup of coffee and the blissful, sacred absence of other human beings. My home office overlooks the manicured street of Maple Creek Estates, a neighborhood so committed to inoffensive beige that it's a minor miracle they allow the grass to be green. My desk faces the window, and my morning ritual is simple. I take the first sip of coffee, a dark roast brewed to the exact temperature that says productive and not third-degree burn, and I watch the world not happen. A car might drive by. A bird might land on a meticulously pruned shrub. It is the pinnacle of serene, soul-crushing boredom. And I'd spent a small fortune on a mortgage to make it my own. As a graphic designer who works from home, my greatest battles were usually fought in the digital realm. My nemesis of the week was a company that sold eco-friendly toilet paper. They wanted a new logo, and their feedback was a masterclass in corporate doublespeak. "Can we make the leaf look more trustworthy?" their marketing head had asked in an email. "We want it to feel authoritative, but also soft, like a CEO giving you a hug." I was deep in the throes of designing a trustworthy leaf when I saw her. Carol Peterson, the newly elected president of our homeowners association, was on the move. Carol was a woman who moved with the kind of rigid purpose usually reserved for mall cops and terminators. She was wearing a blindingly white tennis outfit, a choice that was both aggressive and baffling, as the only tennis court in the community had been converted into a meditation garden 2 years prior. In her hand, she clutched her weapon of choice, a clipboard. To Carol, that clipboard was Excalibur, the Constitution, and a holy text all rolled into one. It was the source of her power. I watched her march down the sidewalk, her visor angled perfectly to shield her eyes while maximizing her view into everyone else's business. She paused at the Miller's house, made a note on her clipboard, probably for a garbage can that was 2.7 inches too far from the curb. And then her head turned. Her eyes, 2 laser points of pure, unadulterated judgment, locked onto my property. Specifically, my mailbox. I leaned back in my chair. My mailbox. It was a mailbox. Black metal, red flag, wooden post. It had been there when I bought the house. It received mail with an efficiency that was, frankly, commendable. It was the Toyota Camry of mailboxes, reliable, boring, and utterly forgettable. Carol's pace quickened. She was on a direct intercept course with my lawn. "Oh no," I muttered to my monitor, where the untrustworthy leaf stared back, mocking me. "Abort mission. Red alert." But it was too late. I'd made the rookie mistake of ordering a new graphics tablet, and the delivery truck had just pulled up. I had to go outside. It was a trap. I opened my front door just as the delivery guy was handing me the package. Carol was already there, waiting at the edge of my driveway like a predator that had cornered its prey. "Leo," she said. Her voice was crisp, with the forced cheerfulness of a flight attendant announcing you'll be making an emergency water landing. "Carol," I replied, tucking the box under my arm. "Great day for whatever it is you're doing." "Community standards inspections," she announced, tapping her clipboard with a perfectly manicured nail. "And I'm afraid we need to talk about your receptacle." I blinked. "My what?" "Carol, if this is about the recycling bin, I swear I flattened the Amazon boxes this time. Mostly." "Your mail receptacle," she clarified, her gaze flicking to the mailbox with disdain. "It's unsightly." I looked at my mailbox. It looked exactly the same as it had 5 minutes ago. Black, boxy, mail-ready. "Unsightly?" I repeated the word as if it were a foreign concept. "It's a mailbox. Its job is to be mailed into. It doesn't need to be a supermodel." She took a step closer to it, pointing a trembling finger. "There's a slight rust spot," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper as if she were pointing out a dead body. Right here, on the flag hinge. I squinted. If I really focused, I could just make out a freckle of reddish brown, no bigger than a ladybug. And the post is showing signs of weather-related fading. It brings down the entire aesthetic of the block. I wanted to ask her what aesthetic that was. 50 Shades of Taupe? But I knew it was pointless. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a verdict. She slid a piece of paper from her clipboard and handed it to me. An official HOA violation notice. It was laminated. Of course it was. You have 14 days to rectify the visual blight, she said, the smile never reaching her cold, dead eyes. Have a wonderful day. She turned and marched off, her tennis shoes squeaking with triumph on the pavement, leaving me standing in my driveway holding a laminated declaration of war. A visual blight for a speck of rust. I called my best friend, Dave, to vent. Just buy a new one, man, he said, his voice of reason a grating sound against my rising tide of indignation. It's $25 at Home Depot. Don't poke the bear. You know what happened to Henderson when he painted his front door forest green instead of the approved woodland fern? They made him repaint it in the rain, I fumed. It was humiliating. Exactly. Don't be Henderson. Just get a new mailbox. He was right, of course. The smart thing to do, the sane thing to do, was to drive to the store, buy the exact same boring black box, and install it. Appease the beast. Maintain the beige. That night, I tried to work on the trustworthy Leaf logo, but my mind was elsewhere. I was stewing. Rectify the visual blight. The phrase echoed in my head. It was so condescending, so needlessly aggressive. It wasn't about a rust spot. It was about power. She was marking her territory. Frustrated, I started browsing a fantasy art website, looking for inspiration. I scrolled past muscular barbarians, ethereal elves, and sprawling castles. And then I saw it. A magnificent, hyper-detailed painting of a black dragon, its head reared back in a silent roar, scales gleaming like obsidian, and a plume of smoke curling from its nostrils. It was powerful. It was epic. It was the furthest thing from woodland fern imaginable. I stared at the dragon. Then I looked out my window at the offending mailbox, a dark, meek shape under the street lamp. An idea began to form in my mind. It was a terrible, beautiful, magnificently petty idea. A slow grin spread across my face, the kind of grin a villain gets right before revealing his ridiculously elaborate evil plan. Rectify the visual blight, she said. I whispered to the empty room. Okay, Carol. Challenge accepted. Let's get really visual. The problem with a truly transcendentally stupid idea is that it often requires outside help. I can design a logo, but I can't forge a soul-stirring monument to spite out of raw steel. For that, you need a specialist. My journey began, as most terrible ideas do, with a Google search. Custom mailbox maker. The results were a sad parade of mailboxes shaped like fish, lighthouses, and folksy barns. This was not what I had in mind. I didn't want quirky. I wanted a statement. I wanted something that would make Carol's laminated notices spontaneously combust. I started calling local metalworkers and contractors. The first few calls did not go well. Hi, I'm looking for a quote on a custom mailbox installation. I'd start, trying to sound as normal as possible. Sure, what kind are you looking for? A gruff voice on the other end would ask. Post-mounted, wall-mounted, locking. Head-mounted, I'd say. Specifically, a life-sized dragon's head. Forged steel, ideally. Maybe with nostrils that can fit a standard envelope from the IRS. A long, heavy silence would follow. The kind of silence that makes you question all your life choices. Sir, is this a prank call? One of them asked, his voice dripping with suspicion. Another one just laughed for 30 seconds straight and then hung up on me. A third, a handyman named Stan, seemed to consider it. A dragon, huh? You want flames with that? That'd be extra, and the city might have something to say about it. Stan was clearly a man of vision, but I needed an artist, not just an arsonist. Discouraged, I ventured into the weirder corners of the internet. I typed in search terms like mythical metal sculpture, custom fantasy fabrication, and guy who can build a dragon head for my mail. That's when I found him. His website was a glorious relic of the early 2000s, all flashing text and clashing fonts, but the portfolio was breathtaking. There, among photos of ornate iron gates and abstract garden sculptures, were pictures of a half-finished griffin, a metallic phoenix with wings of gleaming copper, and a life-sized knight in armor that looked like it could actually fight you. The artist's name was Gus the Inferno Ivanov. The About Me page featured a single, grainy photo of a massive man with a beard that looked like it housed several small woodland creatures. He was wearing a leather apron, holding a terrifyingly large hammer, and standing in front of a forge that glowed like the heart of a volcano. His bio was short and to the point. I forge dreams and nightmares from steel and fire. No project too strange. The mundane is my enemy. I had found my guy. Gus's workshop was located in an industrial park on the other side of town, a place where dreams go to be packed in corrugated cardboard and shipped away. The building was a featureless metal warehouse, but the moment he opened the door, I knew I was in the right place. The air smelled of hot iron, ozone, and ambition. The inside was a chaotic wonderland, a heavy metal Narnia. Half-finished projects littered every surface, an army of garden gnomes wielding tiny gleaming battle axes, a giant, intricate spiderweb made of welded rebar, and what appeared to be a full-scale replica of a Klingon bat'leth. Gus himself was even bigger than his photo suggested. He was a mountain of a man, with arms like tree trunks and a booming voice that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. "You are Leo," he bellowed, his accent a thick, unplaceable Eastern European medley. "The one with the soul of a poet and the mailbox of a peasant." I explained my situation. I told him about Maple Creek Estates, about the soul-crushing beige, about Carol and her laminated violation notice. I showed him the picture of the dragon on my phone. Gus did not laugh. He listened with the intense focus of a surgeon, stroking his magnificent beard and nodding slowly. When I finished, a wide, fierce grin split his face. "Yes," he boomed, clapping a hand on my shoulder that nearly sent me through the floor. "Yes, this is not a job. This is a calling. We will not just build a mailbox, Leo. We will build a statement, a monument to freedom. This dragon will not just hold your mail. It will guard your very soul from the forces of oppressive mediocrity." "I just don't want to get another fine, Gus," I said weakly, my shoulder throbbing. "Details, details." He waved a dismissive hand. "First we forge glory, then we consult bylaws." For the next 2 hours, we were a whirlwind of creative energy. We sketched on a large, grease-stained piece of plywood. My initial idea was just ahead, but Gus had bigger plans. "The jaw must be hinged," he declared. "The mail slot is the mouth of the beast. He will devour your bills and junk mail. It is poetry." He suggested glowing red LED eyes, powered by a small, hidden solar panel on the back of the head. He talked about using stainless steel for the teeth to give them a perpetual glint of menace. He even sketched out a complex internal tubing system. "What's that for?" I asked, pointing to the intricate diagram. Gus leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "For the nuclear option, a small, hidden compartment. You attach a canister from a party smoke machine. If they try to touch it..." Foosh. He made a sound like a cloud erupting. Dragon's breath. Non-toxic, of course, but the psychological impact? Devastating. This man was not just a contractor. He was my co-conspirator, my spiritual guide on this journey into sublime pettiness. We discussed the finish, a matte, powder-coated black to absorb the light and look more menacing. The scale, just big enough to be intimidating but technically compliant with height restrictions. And the name. He needs a name, Gus insisted. A name of power. Volgoth the Undying, Ignis the Soul Eater. How about Reginald? I suggested. Gus stared at me. Reginald? It's unassuming. It's disarming. Nobody expects a Reginald to be a 6-foot-tall metal dragon head. Gus considered this for a long moment, then let out a roar of laughter. Yes, it is perfect. The banality of the name is its own form of psychological warfare. Reginald it is. We shook on it. I transferred a deposit that made my stomach clench, but my soul soar. As I left the workshop and drove back toward the beige conformity of my neighborhood, I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. This was no longer about a mailbox. This was about art, freedom, and the glorious, righteous fury of a man who had been pushed too far by a rust spot. The conspiracy was afoot. The following week, my life took on a strange, new rhythm. By day, I was Leo Maxwell, designer of trustworthy leaves and other corporate nonsense. By night, I was a co-conspirator in an act of spectacular suburban rebellion. The project was too large to be completed entirely at Gus's workshop without raising questions, so Operation Secret Dragon commenced. Gus would fabricate the individual pieces, the massive curved plates for the skull, the wickedly sharp-looking horns, the individually welded scales for the neck. And then, under the cover of darkness, he would deliver them to my house in his beat-up, windowless van. My 2-car garage, once a sedate home for my Honda Civic and a collection of neglected gardening tools, was transformed into a secret lair. We draped thick moving blankets over the garage door windows and sealed the cracks with duct tape. Our work was lit by a single, bare bulb work lamp that cast long dramatic shadows, making the half-assembled dragon parts look even more monstrous. The sounds were the hardest part to conceal. The delicate whir of Gus tightening bolts, the metallic clang of a dropped wrench, the low growl of the electric grinder as we smoothed a weld. Each noise felt like a gunshot in the tomb-like silence of a Maple Creek Estates evening. My go-to excuse for any curious neighbors was a masterpiece of misdirection. "Just got a new hobby," I'd say with a cheerful, slightly manic grin. "Artisanal birdhouses. Very intricate." Mr. Henderson from across the street, the victim of the forest green door incident, just nodded slowly. "Lot of grinding for a birdhouse, Leo," he observed one evening, as a shower of sparks briefly illuminated my garage window. "It's for a very modern kind of bird," I'd replied, "an industrial chic chickadee." Carol, naturally, was suspicious. Her reign as HOA president had imbued her with a sixth sense for non-compliance. Her casual strolls became targeted surveillance missions. Her little white SUV would crawl past my house at unpredictable hours. I'd be in the garage with Gus, holding a giant metal dragon brow in place, and I'd see her silhouette glide by, her head turning slowly, her visor a slash of white in the twilight. Her attacks became more frequent, but smaller, like a wolf testing a fence. I received a notice for my lawn being a quarter-inch too high, a formal warning because my garbage can was put out at 7:05 p.m. instead of the sanctioned post-8:00 p.m. time frame. She even tried to cite me for unnatural lawn discoloration after a small patch of grass turned yellow. It was a war of 1,000 paper cuts, and it only strengthened my resolve. One night, things escalated. We were test-fitting Reginald's jaw, a complex piece of engineering that had to swing open smoothly enough for the mailman, but look menacing enough to strike fear into the hearts of HOA presidents. Gus was using a small angle grinder to fine-tune a hinge. The noise was unavoidable, a high-pitched metallic scream that cut through the night. 10 minutes later, flashing blue and red lights painted streaks across my moving blankets. "Police," Gus whispered, his eyes wide. "She did it! The witch, she actually did it!" We threw a giant canvas tarp over Reginald's half-assembled head, turning him from a mythical beast into a vaguely dragon-shaped lump. I took a deep breath, wiped the grease from my hands, and went to face the music. 2 officers stood on my porch. One was older, with a mustache that had seen things, and a weary expression that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. His name tag read Miller. The other was younger, with a barely suppressed smirk. "Davis." "Good evening, sir," Officer Miller said, his voice flat. "We received a call from a neighbor." He glanced at a notepad. "Reported strange noises and bright, unnatural flashes coming from your garage. Said it sounded like, well, a dragon being slain." I forced a laugh, hoping it sounded more charming homeowner and less unhinged villain. "A dragon? Wow, that's a new one. Just some metalworking officers? It's a new hobby, very therapeutic. Helps me unwind after a long day of designing logos." "Mind if we take a look?" Miller asked, his eyes scanning past me into the house. "Just to make sure you're not building a death ray or anything?" Of course," I said, leading them through the house to the garage. Gus was standing by the workbench, attempting to look casual, which was difficult for a man his size covered in metal dust. The tarp-covered lump dominated the center of the space. Miller circled the lump slowly, his hand resting on his belt. "That's a big birdhouse," he said, his expression unchanging. Davis, on the other hand, couldn't contain his curiosity. He reached out and lifted a corner of the tarp, revealing a section of gleaming black scales and the tip of a wicked-looking horn. He dropped the tarp quickly, a grin spreading across his face. "That's one heck of a modern art piece," he said, catching my eye. "Abstract, right? About the duality of man?" I nodded gravely. "You get it. It's a commentary on the fragile yet aggressive nature of suburban life." Miller shot Davis a look that could curdle milk. He sighed, the sound of a man who was profoundly underpaid for this kind of weirdness. "All right, sir. Your hobby is your hobby. Just try to keep the dragon-slaying noises to a minimum after 10 p.m. Some of us have to sleep." They left. I watched their patrol car pull away, its lights disappearing down the beige street. Behind me, Gus let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for an hour. "That was too close," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "We're almost there, Gus," I said, pulling the tarp off Reginald. "Just a few more nights." We looked at the dragon's head. The eyes weren't wired yet, and the jaw was still detached. But even in pieces, it was magnificent. It was absurd. It was perfect. The final touches were all that remained. We had a plan for the installation. A meticulously coordinated operation we'd codenamed Dawn of the Dragon. The war was about to escalate from a series of covert skirmishes to a full-blown public spectacle. And I couldn't wait. The night of the installation was thick and moonless, a perfect cloak for our suburban espionage. We'd picked a Thursday, the night before trash pickup, knowing people would be distracted by the ritual of dragging their bins to the curb. At 2 a.m., the only sounds on the street were the hum of refrigerators and the distant bark of a lonely dog. Gus arrived in his van, headlights off, rolling the last 20 feet to my driveway in neutral. We moved like a slapstick SWAT team, dressed in black, communicating with a series of clumsy hand signals and panicked whispers. "You have the post hole digger?" Gus hissed, unloading a mess of tools onto my lawn. "I thought you were bringing it," I hissed back. "It was on the list! Item 4, device for hole-making." A frantic 10-minute search of my garage yielded a rusty old shovel. It would have to do. Digging up the old mailbox post was a sweaty, undignified affair. The ground was harder than expected, full of rocks and stubborn roots. Every scrape of the shovel against a stone sounded like an explosion in the dead quiet. A neighbor's motion-activated security light flashed on, freezing us in place like a pair of guilty raccoons. We waited, hearts pounding, until it clicked off again. Once the old post was out, lying on the grass like a fallen soldier, the real challenge began. Reginald was a beast. Even disassembled into 2 main parts, the head and the thick steel neck post, he was incredibly heavy. We had to use a small engine hoist I'd rented, with a large and likely unrefundable deposit, to lift the main post and lower it into the new, deeper hole. We mixed a bag of quick-setting concrete with water from my garden hose, pouring the gray slurry around the base. "Level," Gus grunted, holding a bubble level against the post. "It must be perfectly level. A dragon with a tilted head is a comedic dragon. We are aiming for epic." The final step was mounting the head itself. We hoisted it into place, the carefully machined joint sliding onto the post with a satisfying thunk. Gus tightened the massive hidden bolts that held it all together, his wrenches clicking softly in the dark. As the last bolt was secured, we stepped back to admire our work. Even in the faint glow of the distant streetlights, he was breathtaking. A void of darkness against the slightly less dark night. A silhouette of pure, unadulterated defiance. He was a creature of myth and legend, silently roaring at the rows of identical beige-sided houses. We cleaned up our mess, packed the tools, and disposed of the old mailbox in the back of Gus's van like a body. By 4 a.m., we were done. We shook hands, a silent acknowledgement of the beautiful, stupid thing we had just done, and Gus drove off into the darkness. I went inside, my body aching, my mind buzzing. I wouldn't be able to sleep. I just sat in my office chair, staring out the window, waiting for the sun to rise. The first sign of life was Mr. Henderson, out for his 6 a.m. power walk. He came down the street, his arms pumping, his eyes fixed forward. As he drew level with my house, he stopped. Dead. His arms froze mid-pump. He took a hesitant step closer, then another. He slowly removed his glasses, wiped them on his shirt, and put them back on. The dragon was still there. He just shook his head and kept walking, but his pace was noticeably faster. Next came the cars. The 7:15 a.m. commuter rush. The first car, a sensible silver sedan, slowed down, then pulled over. The driver rolled down her window and just stared. The car behind her honked. Soon, a small traffic jam was forming. People were getting out of their cars, their phones held up, the flashes from their cameras like tiny strobes in the early morning light. The neighborhood kids were the best part. A group of them, on their way to the bus stop, gathered at the edge of my lawn, their backpacks dropped on the sidewalk. They approached Reginald with a kind of reverent awe usually reserved for museum dinosaurs. One of them, a little boy in a superhero t-shirt, tentatively reached out and touched one of the steel teeth. Then he ran back to his friends, shouting, "It's real!" Later, I saw they had started leaving offerings at the base of the post. A particularly cool-looking rock, a half-eaten granola bar, and a shiny Charizard Pokémon card. My mailman Frank arrived around 10:30. Frank was a man who had seen it all. Nothing fazed him. He pulled up in his little white truck, got out, and stopped. He did a full, slow circle around Reginald, his eyes narrowed in professional assessment. He poked one of the horns. He rapped his knuckles against a scale. Then he opened the hinged jaw, peered inside, and shrugged. He put my mail, mostly junk and a bill, into Reginald's mouth, closed it with a soft clang, and gave the snout a friendly pat. As he walked back to his truck, I could just hear him mutter to himself, "Seen weirder." And then, at precisely 11:03 a.m., she arrived. Carol's white SUV screeched to a halt in front of my house. She got out, leaving the driver's side door open. For a full minute, she just stood there, her clipboard hanging limply at her side. Her face was a canvas of rapidly shifting emotions. I saw confusion, which melted into disbelief, which hardened into pure, unbridled rage. Finally, all emotion drained away, replaced by a terrifying, Arctic calm. She was no longer just an HOA president. She was a general surveying an enemy fortification. She marched up my driveway, her tennis shoes crunching on the gravel with military precision. She didn't knock. She just stood on my porch and waited for me to open the door. I did, holding my coffee mug. "Morning, Carol. Something I can help you with?" Her voice was a low, dangerous hiss. "What is that?" I followed her pointed finger to the magnificent creature standing guard at the end of my lawn. "Oh, that? It's my new mailbox," I said, taking a sip of coffee. "His name is Reginald. I got your notice, remember? The old one was an unsightly blight. Is this not a sufficient rectification?" "You have," she sputtered, words failing her for a moment. "You have violated 17 bylaws, the size, the material, the sheer audacity." "I don't think so," I said, feeling a surge of glorious confidence. I read the rule book, Bylaw 7, Section C, Paragraph 4. Mail receptacles must be constructed of metal or treated wood. Reginald is steel, check. Bylaw 9, Section A. No structure on the property line may exceed 5 feet in height. The post is exactly 4'11". I measured. The head is just decorative flair. I smiled. "Show me the bylaw that specifies a maximum level of awesomeness, Carol." I looked. It's not in there. Her face turned a shade of crimson that would have been a violation in itself. She was speechless. Finally, she found her voice. "There will be an emergency meeting," she seethed, "and I will bring the full weight of the Maple Creek Estates Homeowners Association crashing down on you, Leo Maxwell. This is not over." She spun on her heel and stormed back to her car. "I'm counting on it," I called after her, but she was already gone. I leaned against my doorframe, coffee in hand, and looked at Reginald. He stood proud and defiant under the morning sun. The war had officially begun. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Wednesday. The flyer Carol shoved in everyone's mail slot, pointedly not using Reginald's mouth, but wedging it in the door instead, was printed on blood-red paper and featured the subject line, "Urgent. Regarding the monstrosity at 114 Willow Lane." She had a flair for the dramatic. I had to give her that. The meeting was held in the Maple Creek Community Center, a soulless beige building with a rec room that smelled faintly of stale coffee and regret. On a normal night, an HOA meeting might attract a dozen people, mostly retirees with nothing better to do. Tonight, it was standing room only. The entire neighborhood had turned out for the spectacle. It had all the energy of a public shaming, and I was the guest of honor. Carol stood at a podium at the front of the room, looking severe. Beside her was a projector screen. She began her presentation with a slideshow she had titled, with no hint of irony, "The Beast of Maple Creek, an Assault on Our Community Standards." The first slide was a grainy, zoomed-in photo of Reginald, taken at night, that made him look like a creature from a horror movie. "This structure," she began, her voice trembling with manufactured outrage, "appeared on our peaceful street last Thursday. It is a gross and deliberate violation of everything we stand for: uniformity, aesthetic cohesion, and property values." She then launched into a rapid-fire, out-of-context quoting of the HOA bylaws. Bylaw 12. All exterior modifications must be pre-approved by the Architectural Review Committee. Bylaw 15. No lawn ornamentation deemed distasteful or incongruous with the community aesthetic shall be permitted. Bylaw 3. Members shall not engage in behavior that disrupts the peace and harmony of the neighborhood. With each point, she'd click to a new, increasingly dramatic photo of Reginald. Reginald from the side. Reginald from above. She must have used a drone for that one. A close-up of his stainless steel teeth. The room was buzzing. I could feel the neighborhood splitting into factions right there in the flimsy folding chairs. Carol's loyalists, a group of older residents I called the Beige Brigade, nodded along, muttering things like, "disgraceful," and "think of the children." But there was another faction, too. The parents of the kids who now made daily pilgrimages to Reginald's shrine. The younger couples who were sick of the HOA's oppressive rules. And my secret weapon, Mrs. Gable, an 80-year-old widow from 2 doors down who had a glint of pure mischief in her eyes. When Carol finished her presentation, she opened the floor for discussion, clearly expecting a chorus of agreement. "Well?" she asked, scanning the crowd. "Does anyone have anything to say in defense of this eyesore?" I stood up. A hush fell over the room. "I do," I said, walking to the front. I hadn't come unprepared. I had my own copy of the HOA rulebook, filled with little sticky notes, courtesy of a long and strategic phone call with Gus. "First of all," I started, "his name is Reginald, and he is not a structure. He is a mailbox, performing the duties of a mailbox. As for Bylaw 12, the Architectural Review Committee is supposed to meet on the 1st of every month. According to the minutes posted on the community website, they've canceled the last 3 meetings. I can't get approval from a committee that doesn't exist." A few people murmured in agreement. "As for distasteful or incongruous, that's a subjective term. My son thinks it's the coolest thing he's ever seen," a dad from down the street called out. "Mine too," another parent added. "He actually wants to go get the mail now." Mrs. Gable stood up, leaning on her cane. "Carol," she said, her voice surprisingly strong. "For 10 years, I've watched this board penalize people for having the wrong shade of white trim. I once got a violation because my wind chimes were deemed excessively melodic. That dragon is the first interesting thing to happen in this neighborhood since the great raccoon infestation of '09. I, for one, love it." The room erupted into a mix of applause and angry muttering. The war was on. The next morning it got worse for Carol. Someone at the meeting had live tweeted the whole thing. A local news blogger picked it up. The headline read, "Suburban Dragon Sparks HOA Inferno in Maple Creek." By noon, a TV news van was parked across the street from my house. I was ambushed by a reporter with impossibly white teeth and a microphone. I decided to lean into it. "Honestly," I said, trying to look earnest and a little beleaguered, "I was just trying to follow the rules. I received a notice that my old mailbox was an unsightly blight. I just wanted to rectify the situation with something that had a little more personality." Is a little personality really a violation? Reginald the Mailbox Dragon became a minor viral sensation. A Team Dragon Facebook group popped up and got 500 members in a day. People from other towns were driving by to take selfies. Carol was losing the public relations war, and it made her desperate. That's when she called the cops again. This time, her complaint was public hazard and unlicensed public sculpture. Officers Miller and Davis arrived looking deeply, profoundly tired. "Leo," Miller sighed, not even bothering with formalities. "We're back. It's about the dragon." "Reginald," I corrected him gently. "And he's a mailbox officer, a federally protected postal receptacle, last I checked. Carol Peterson claims the red LED eyes are a traffic hazard. Miller said, consulting his notepad with zero enthusiasm. And that it's attracting undesirables, Davis chimed in, unable to hide his grin. By which she means teenagers taking selfies, sir. We checked. They seem pretty desirable. One of them even offered me a TikTok dance lesson. Miller rubbed his temples. Look, we can't do anything. It's not breaking any laws. It's on your property. It's not a traffic hazard. But can you please, for the love of all that is holy, try to keep the suburban drama to a minimum? My ulcer is starting to act up. They left, but the visit gave Carol a new, darker idea. If she couldn't win legally or publicly, she would resort to covert ops. That night, my security camera, installed on Gus's advice, sent an alert to my phone. I watched the live feed as a shadowy figure crept onto my lawn. It was Carol, armed with a can of gray spray paint, the officially approved HOA color for utility fixtures. She was about to deface Reginald. But I was ready. I pressed a button on a new app on my phone. On the screen, I saw 4 sprinklers, which Gus and I had strategically placed around the mailbox, erupt from the lawn. They weren't normal sprinklers. We had adjusted the heads to create a powerful overlapping wall of water. The feed showed Carol letting out a startled shriek as she was drenched from 4 different directions. She dropped the spray paint can and fled, a soggy, defeated shadow disappearing into the night. I saved the video clip, for posterity. The war had just gotten very, very personal. The sprinkler incident was the final straw. Humiliation, it turns out, is a powerful motivator for unhinged behavior. Carol had lost the support of the board. She'd been defeated by the police, and she'd been outsmarted by a sprinkler system. She was cornered, and a cornered Carol is a dangerous Carol. She spent the next 2 days poring over the HOA covenant, searching for one last desperate loophole. And she found one. A vague, dusty bylaw about unapproved structures on public easements. The first 3 feet of my lawn, technically, belonged to the city as an easement. Reginald's nose and a small portion of his glorious snout were, arguably, trespassing on that easement. It was a flimsy pretext, but it was all she needed. She declared Reginald to be an illegal encroachment, and, citing an emergency clause in the bylaws that allowed the president to act unilaterally to remove hazards, she hired a private company to do her dirty work. Saturday morning, I was woken by a deep, rumbling sound. I looked out my window and my blood ran cold. A massive, bright yellow tow truck, the kind they use for pulling semi-trucks out of ditches, was parked in front of my house. A grim-faced man in greasy overalls was unspooling a thick, rusty chain. Carol stood on the sidewalk, arms crossed, a smug, triumphant smirk on her face. This was it, her final move. But the commotion had woken the neighborhood. Doors opened. People poured onto their lawns, phone cameras at the ready. The members of Team Dragon were assembling. Mrs. Gable came out, wielding her cane like a weapon. The dad who praised Reginald's mail retrieval incentive properties stood on his lawn, shaking his head. The kids who had left offerings at Reginald's base looked on with horror. A standoff ensued. "You can't do this," Mrs. Gable shouted at Carol. "It's an illegal structure," Carol yelled back, brandishing a copy of the bylaw. "I have every right." The tow truck operator, a man who clearly just wanted to finish his shift and go home, looked caught in the middle of a very weird domestic dispute. He reluctantly hooked the chain around Reginald's steel neck. The metal links clanked ominously. My heart pounded in my chest. I'd hoped it wouldn't come to this. But Gus and I had planned for every contingency. This was the moment. This was when we went nuclear. I pulled out my phone and sent a single text message to Gus, who, as planned, was hiding in the bushes across the street with a small remote control. The text read, "Light him up." Just as the tow truck driver tightened the chain and the winch began to groan, it happened. A deep, satisfying hiss filled the air. A thick cloud of white smoke, dense and dramatic, billowed from Reginald's nostrils. It wasn't fire, just harmless, unscented party smoke, but the effect was spectacular. The smoke swirled around the tow truck driver's head, momentarily blinding him. Simultaneously, Reginald's deep red LED eyes, powered by their own hidden battery, flared to life, casting a menacing glow. It was magnificent. It was ridiculous. It was a masterpiece of suburban psychological warfare. The tow truck driver yelled in surprise and stumbled backward, dropping his remote. The small crowd gasped, then erupted into cheers and laughter. The kids went absolutely wild. The news crew, which had been tipped off by an anonymous source, me, captured the whole thing. The image was perfect. The mighty tow truck, thwarted by a smoke-breathing mailbox, surrounded by a cheering crowd of suburban rebels. Officers Miller and Davis arrived, drawn by the disturbance. Miller looked at the scene. The dragon, the smoke, the tow truck, the cheering neighbors, the apoplectic Carol, and just shook his head, a look of profound resignation on his face. Davis, however, failed to hide a broad grin. He even gave me a subtle thumbs up when Miller wasn't looking. The tow truck driver, seeing the news cameras and realizing he was now the star of a viral video about being defeated by a piece of lawn art, had had enough. "That's it, lady," he said to Carol, unhooking his chain. "I'm not paid enough for this supernatural stuff. You can keep your dragon." He got in his truck and drove away, leaving a trail of diesel fumes and shattered dreams in his wake. The final blow came from Mrs. Gable. She stepped forward, past the dissipating smoke, and brandished a clipboard of her own. "Carol Peterson," she announced, her voice ringing with authority. "In light of your recent abuse of power, flagrant disregard for community opinion, and general tyrannical behavior, we, the undersigned residents of Maple Creek Estates, present this petition to have you recalled as HOA president." She had more than enough signatures. Carol looked at the petition, then at the cheering crowd, then at the smirking face of Officer Davis. Defeated, humiliated on camera, and outmaneuvered at every turn, she finally broke. She let out a frustrated shriek, turned, and stormed back to her house. The war was over. Reginald had won. In the weeks that followed, a strange and wonderful peace settled over Maple Creek Estates. The recall vote was a landslide. Carol was out, replaced as HOA president by a chill 30-something dad whose primary platform was fewer rules, more block parties. The official charges against me and Reginald were quietly dropped at the first meeting of the new board. Reginald himself went from being a point of contention to a beloved local landmark. The Team Dragon Facebook page evolved into a neighborhood community page. The kids appointed themselves Reginald's official guardians, leaving him fresh offerings daily and shooing away pigeons who dared to perch on his horns. The HOA, under its new, saner leadership, even added a themed mailbox approval clause to the bylaws, a clause so specific to Reginald's dimensions and features that it effectively grandfathered him in as a permanent, celebrated exception to the rule. He had his own line item in the budget now, under community art and morale. The neighborhood started to change in small ways. The Hendersons, emboldened by my victory, repainted their door a vibrant, unapproved shade of cobalt blue. Someone else put up a flock of pink plastic flamingos. A quiet revolution against the tyranny of beige had begun, and a smoke-breathing dragon was its unlikely figurehead. My life returned to a semblance of normal, but better. I still designed logos, but I did so with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had stared into the abyss of suburban conformity and made it blink. The trustworthy Leaf project was finally approved. mostly because I was too distracted to argue with their terrible feedback anymore. Gus became a local celebrity, getting a slew of new commissions for statement pieces. His new business cards read, "Gus Ivanov, forger of dreams, vanquisher of HOAs." One sunny morning, I was sitting on my porch, sipping my coffee and watching the world happen. Frank the mailman came by on his route. He stopped at Reginald, opened his jaw, and placed the mail inside. Before closing it, he gave the dragon's snout an affectionate pat. "Morning, Reggie," he said, then continued on his way. My phone buzzed. It was Dave. He'd seen the final, triumphant news report online. "I just saw a video of your mailbox smoking out a tow truck," he said, his voice a mixture of awe and exasperation. "You are certifiably 100% insane. You know that, right?" I chuckled, looking out at my glorious, ridiculous, beautiful dragon. He stood proud and defiant in the morning sun, his black scales gleaming, a silent guardian against the forces of mediocrity. A Charizard card, a tribute from one of his guardians, was tucked carefully under one of his horns. "Hey," I said, a wide grin spreading across my face. "She said the old one was ugly." I took a sip of my perfect coffee. "I just wanted to rectify the visual blight,"